How can we find meaning and purpose in our spiritual journey? How can the teachings of C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity illuminate our path and transform our lives? In this video, we will explore the answers to these questions through Lewis's profound ideas. With his mastery of combining powerful metaphors with spiritual truths, Lewis leads us on a journey of discovery, faith, and personal transformation. Let's begin. 1. The concept of free will, according to C.S. Lewis, is a fundamental pillar in the structure of human understanding of morality, choice, and the very nature of good and evil. God created things that had free will. That means creatures which can go wrong or right, reflects Lewis, delving into the complexities that accompany the gift of freedom. This notion highlights the intrinsic duality of free will, the ability to choose good with all its virtues and joys, or to veer off the path of error, opening doors to suffering and injustice. Lewis advances with a provocative perspective. If a thing is free to be good, it's also free to be bad. Here, freedom is seen not just as a faculty of choice, but as an internal battleground, where each decision reflects not just a momentary preference, but an echo of the soul resonating through the fabric of the universe. This freedom, though perilous, is considered by Lewis as essential for the existence of any love, goodness, or joy worth having. The choice to confer free will upon creatures, despite the inherent risks, is presented by Lewis as a divine decision grounded in the pursuit of a creation capable of genuine love and authentic communion. A world of automatons, of creatures that worked like machines, would hardly be worth creating, argues Lewis, highlighting a vision where true joy and meaning emerge not from programmed obedience, but from a free and voluntary choice. This viewpoint underscores the conviction that the capacity to choose wrongly is inseparable from the ability to truly love and find authentic joy. 2. In the passage on whether Jesus is Lord, C.S. Lewis directly confronts one of the central dilemmas of Christianity with a clarity that defies indifference. He begins by attempting to cut through a common misconception, the willingness to acknowledge Jesus as a great moral teacher, but not to accept his claims of divinity. Lewis insists that this position is untenable, arguing that Jesus' own declarations about himself force a decisive choice. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on the level of a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. With this statement, Lewis not only challenges neutrality towards Jesus, but also highlights the seriousness of his claims. If Jesus were not who he claimed to be, then his instructions would lose all moral merit, relegating his claims to either delusion or malevolence. The choice proposed by Lewis is stark and inescapable. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. This trilemma, Lord, lunatic, or something worse, leaves no room for a moderate or uncommitted appreciation of Jesus. It is a summons to confront the reality of his claims and the profound implications they have for faith and life. Lewis vehemently rejects the idea of treating Jesus as a mere ethical educator, criticizing such a view as condescending absurdity. He argues that Jesus did not leave open this possibility, not intending to be remembered merely as a moral leader. Jesus' instructions and actions, intertwined with his claims of divinity, demand a deeper and more personal response. This challenge leads to a reflection on the nature of belief and the seriousness with which we approach the central claims of the Christian faith. Accepting Jesus as Lord and God is more than an intellectual assent. It is an act of faith that redefines the orientation of our lives, recognizing his authority and the truth of his mission and teachings. If you're enjoying this content, consider subscribing to the channel for more updates and videos. 3. Lewis's intellectual journey leads us to confront the paradox of the existence of evil and injustice in a world created by a just God. My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? This initial inquiry challenges the notion of moral relativism and points to the existence of an absolute standard of justice, suggesting that our ability to identify evil implies the existence of objective good. Lewis continues, questioning the basis of his own critique of the universe. A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Here he touches upon a crucial point, the innate awareness of justice and righteousness that transcends personal subjectivity, suggesting an origin beyond mere social construction or adaptive evolution. Considering the possibility of abandoning his notion of justice as merely personal, Lewis realizes a collapse in his argument against the existence of God. But if I went on to say that the world was really unjust, then my argument against God collapsed too, for the argument depended on saying that the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my fancies. This reflection reveals the inconsistency of denying God's existence, based on the perception of injustice, because such perception presupposes a standard of justice that, in turn, points to a transcendental origin. Lewis's conclusion is a testament to the human quest for meaning and order amidst the apparent chaos of the universe. Thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, in other words, that the whole of reality was senseless, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely my idea of justice, was full of sense. This insight illuminates the contradiction of asserting a senseless universe while clamoring for justice and righteousness. 4. Lewis begins his reflection with a revealing comparison. God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. This analogy invites us to consider the intentionality behind our creation, suggesting that, just as a machine is designed to function with a specific type of fuel, we were created to find our source of energy, our purpose, and sustenance in God. Continuing with the metaphor, Lewis states, a car is made to run on petrol, and it would not run properly on anything else. Here, petrol represents more than just physical fuel. It symbolizes the spiritual essence that is necessary for the human engine to operate at its full capacity. This comparison vividly illustrates the idea that attempting to find satisfaction or purpose outside of this divine source is as futile as expecting a car to function without proper fuel. Deepening the analogy, Lewis clarifies, God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. This statement underscores the exclusivity of the relationship between the Creator and the creature, emphasizing that true fulfillment and joy can only be found in intimate communion with God. Lewis then addresses a common misconception, highlighting that it is futile to ask God for happiness and peace in our own way, ignoring the religious dimension. That is why it is no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. This observation leads us to reflect on the nature of true happiness, which transcends temporary pleasures and the superficial solutions we often seek. 5. Life, as imagined by Lewis, is a vast corridor filled with doors, each representing a spiritual path or belief. The corridor is a place for waiting, a place from which to try the various doors, not a place to live. This analogy underscores the transitory nature of the spiritual quest, where the comfort of indecision or reluctance to commit to a path is seen not as solutions but as temporary and unsatisfactory postures. Lewis acknowledges the diversity of human experience in this quest, noting that some people may find they have to wait in the corridor for a considerable time, while others almost immediately feel which door they must knock on. This variation reflects the complexity of individual spiritual journeys and the patience required in seeking clarity and conviction. However, he reassures, suggesting that any waiting is part of the divine plan. But I am sure that God doesn't keep anyone waiting unless he sees that it is good for him to wait. The waiting in the corridor, though necessary, is not an end in itself. When you do get into your room, you will find that the long wait has done you some kind of good, which you would not have had otherwise. This promise suggests that periods of uncertainty and active seeking are enriching, shaping us in ways we do not fully understand until we find our door. Lewis's guidance for this waiting is active and intentional. You must regard it as waiting, not as camping. This implies a diligent search for truth, a commitment to pray for light, and the practice of universal precepts that unite all seekers of truth, regardless of the specific door they eventually knock on. 6. Lewis begins with a sharp observation about the correspondence between desire and satisfaction in human experience. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. This premise establishes a natural logic where each innate longing has its complement in the physical world, such as hunger finding answer in food and the desire to swim finding solace in water. However, Lewis advances to a deeper dimension of desire, one that transcends earthly satisfactions. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. This reflection invites us to consider the possibility that our chronic dissatisfaction with earthly pleasures may be indicative of our ultimate origin and destiny beyond the boundaries of this physical world. Lewis argues that this inherent dissatisfaction does not discredit the universe, but reveals the true nature of earthly pleasures. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. This perspective guides us to see life's joys not as ends in themselves, but as signposts, pointing to a greater and fuller reality, to the real thing we long for. From this understanding, Lewis delineates a dual approach to living. I must, on the one hand, never despise or be ungrateful for earthly blessings, and on the other, never mistake them for something of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. This guidance balances gratitude for the gifts of this life with the recognition that they are foreshadowings of an ultimate and more satisfying reality. 7. The image of a living house serves as a powerful representation of the human being, a vessel of potential and dwelling place of spirit. Lewis invites us to imagine God as the master builder, whose intervention in our lives, though initially understandable and even welcomed, eventually transcends our comprehension and expectations. God comes to rebuild this house. This process begins with fundamental repairs, correcting obvious flaws that we acknowledge and accept as necessary. However, divine work in us often advances beyond the expected, entering into unknown and sometimes uncomfortable territories. But suddenly, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. This phase of the process can be painful and confusing as it challenges our preconceived notions of who we are and what we need to be fixed or complete. The key to understanding this seemingly chaotic transformation is to recognize the divine vision and purpose behind it. The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. God is not merely interested in restoring use to the state of decent little cottages we envision for ourselves. He is committed to a radical reconstruction, aiming for a dwelling of splendor and significance far beyond our limited understanding. Lewis describes a process of ambitious addition and expansion, putting in a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. These changes, though initially painful and bewildering, reflect God's desire to transform our existence into something grand and beautiful, a structure worthy of the divine presence itself. Through the rich metaphors and profound reflections presented by C.S. Lewis, we are invited to contemplate the spiritual journey and personal transformation in a new and revealing light. Whether considering free will, the nature of our deepest desires, or the process of being reconstructed by the divine